Welcome back to the show, Seekers, where we explore healing, transformation, and the sacred journey back to wholeness. I'm your host, Mara, and today we are opening the space for a conversation that is both tender and necessary. This episode is dedicated to the emotional lives of men, those often silent struggles, the unspoken griefs, and the deep yearning for connection and grace. In a world that often asks men to be strong, silent, and stoic, we are here to ask a different question. What does healing look like when men are allowed to feel? Joining me today are three extraordinary guests. Each of them is a vortex healer, and each one bringing a unique perspective on emotional wellness, masculinity, and the path to inner peace. First up, Roo Osterfield, with 20 years of professional practice, healer with a multidisciplinary approach, trained in 7 modalities, and trauma therapist who has worked with ex-military special forces and civilians with CPTSD and PTSD, world champions, elite athletes, financial executives, and celebrity. He's also a soon-to-be published author who has developed multiple energy-based therapy transformation programs for both women and men, including the Elite Success Clinic, where he helps people to become the elite 1% of their chosen field. Ro, we will need an episode just to introduce your curriculum. It is an honor to have your expertise and presence here today. Diederik van der Boor from Amsterdam, the Netherlands, who has a background in information and communication technology and engineering. His encounter with the healing world, and in particularly with vortex healing, divine magic healing, allowed him to process deep childhood wounds, confront hidden emotional patterns and emotional shutdowns. His own journey gives him a lived understanding of what his clients often experience and helps them embody love and balance in day-to-day life. And thank you for joining us, Diederik. Maximilian Buchman is a German-born male coach and author who guides men to embody a healthy and mature masculinity as a strong and trustworthy presence. He helps men embracing their authentic strength and stepping into a more grounded version of themselves. He's the founder of Love Like a King, where he offers one-to-one mentorship and men's retreats in Bali and teachings around masculine energy, relational intimacy, and self-empowerment. And thank you, Max, for accepting my invitation to the show. Whilst this episode is centered on the emotional healing of men, it's also an invitation for women to listen and gain deeper understanding, because healing begins with awareness, compassion, and an honest conversation on both sides. Gentlemen, now that we are all suitably motivated, let's begin. I'd like to start from a phrase that is often being directed to women, and that is, you are in your masculine energy. I noticed that looking at the relational field today, there are new tendencies emerging, such as men not initiating dates anymore, there is ghosting, there is passivity, and often it's the woman who ends up chasing. So I can't help but feeling like this is not just about modern culture or shifting of gender roles, but it's more about wounds that have not been named or held. Could it be that so many men are unconsciously reenacting patterns of emotional withdrawal that they have learned in childhood, and that women in turn are stepping into masculine roles to fill the gap of emotional connection? What do you see happening here, guys? Why are so many women embodying masculine energy, and what does that say about the emotional state of men today?
So what I've learned over the years of working with men across the world and hearing their stories, and of course also my own story, how I went through very difficult childhood. There was lots of violence in my childhood and no healthy relationship model. But what I've learned talking with others about this is women are not stepping into their masculine energy necessarily because they want to or by choice. It's more a thing of the masculine in our lives. It has to be taken care of. When we talk about fundamental things like providership, right? And holding oneself emotionally, but also having a direction in life, leadership, all of these things. And I feel women are stepping into this because most men are not showing up in it. And it's not because they're wrong, it's just because they've never been taught how to. And because there's so much confusion right now in the world, I believe, around genders and gender roles and what would really be healthy. So women are stepping into it, and it doesn't really serve most women. What I hear from the women that I do healing work with is it actually drains them, it makes them exhausted and tired by having to do this and at the same time still managing their life as a woman. So I see a big conflict there happening. And why are men not showing up, right? So it's, in my experience, it has a lot to do with the lack of role models that we have when we grow up, right? Most of us didn't have the ideal father that was leading us or initiating us, right? So the things that I've seen that I had to go through over the last decade and a half myself to come out of my trauma to manage to be a healthy masculine, can allow my woman to be in her feminine and not have to hold that anymore, was first of all healing, right? You mentioned healing work. First of all, healing my own childhood wounds on core issues that would in the past not allow me to behave in a way that was serving in the relationship, right? And to take on a healthy masculine in the relationship. And the second thing that I've seen, which is really not talked about enough, is the matters of actual maturity, the matters of initiation into mature masculine, how we can, as men, really enter from the psychology of a young boy into the mature masculine that will then really take care of this in the dynamics and dating and relationships. And this is, I discovered this because I was so unhealthy myself in the relationship, and I had all these reoccurring patterns. So at some point, I discovered the ancient art of rites of passage, right? How that was part of culture everywhere in the world, how men would be initiated from boy to man through learning from their elders and through being going through a ceremonial initiation into maturity. And that is missing in the world. And that's what I see is the biggest pattern there, because so many men are actually boys in adult male bodies, not being able to take care of the woman emotionally and sometimes also physically. So then they try to, but they just can't. And I can tell for myself and for my clients, we are then relating. I call this the mama's boy syndrome. We're more relating from the boy to the woman, which would be the romantic partner, more as a mother role, which is, of course, killing polarity attraction. And it's just not healthy for anyone involved, right? So this is what I've seen, the sort of the healing work, the initiation work. And for the last part is the mastering our sexuality, because that can often be something that becomes super unsafe for women when it is unconscious, when it is conditioned by pornography, etc., and when that is not in check. So these are the three major initiations of healing, maturity, and sexual mastery. And I see this is really what makes us then able in these times also to fully show up for the women, and they can finally feel safe and are safe to get out of their masculine and enjoy being in their feminine.
Rob, would you like perhaps to add something to that?
Yeah, I gotta be honest. I've been the last year or two. I've been looking at nothing to do with masculine and feminine, but actually just love. What is love within a relationship? Because I have a slightly checkered and interesting and beautiful dating past myself. I have dated amazing, very powerful women that I've got on absolutely with, and I've dated women that had a lot more powerlessness, which I didn't resonate with so much. And for me, as a man, I don't look for a girl who's 10 years younger than me and doesn't know what she's doing in life. I like a woman who's an entrepreneur. I like a woman who's got dreams, and I absolutely love partnering with her in those dreams. I like power. It's one of the things that attracts me. But then everybody has different things that they're looking for. And I see a lot of coaches on Instagram. There's a really big one. I won't mention his name. His name's Danny, but I won't mention the rest of it. Does like awakening weekends. And I look at him and he's talking, and everything he's saying is correct. He's talking about being in the masculine and holding the woman. And he's got his new partner who's 20 years younger than him. They've got a child, and it's his twin flame soulmate and all this kind of stuff. And every time I listen to him, all I see energetically is a boy trying to prove to his mother that she doesn't need to work anymore and that it's okay and he can do anything. And every time he's working with, and these big weekends, and there's these women there and they're crying away, and these men and they're crying away, and then this woman, she's not getting the result that she wants. And they did this whole take, and I'm taking one look at her, and like, the girl's an entrepreneur. She wants to change the world. And every time she's trying to step forward, she's being told, oh no, now you're stepping into your masculine. You must be traumatized. You must be ruined. There's something wrong with you. And I think that we've got this idea of this template, and we've got this whole men are meant to look after, men are meant to lead, men are meant to provide, men are meant to protect. And do you know what? That is absolutely beautiful. And I think you should do that for someone you love, whether you're a boy, a girl, a man, a dog, a cat, or whatever. If you care about someone, you want to protect them, you want to treat them like they're precious. But at the same time, if you look at the energetics of what a woman is now bringing in consciously, if a man is going to provide, then she can't have as much money as him. I had a client who's just been in Forbes or a while ago. She's a coach in South America, and she's doing incredibly well. But she had a partner that was coming in, and she was earning maybe 300 grand a year, and her partner was earning about 100 grand more than her, and she couldn't continue the business. Every time she tried to expand the business, it just wouldn't get any higher because she had this whole thing that she needed a man to provide for her because that was her ego, which is beautiful, but also it's would make her feel safe. So she's actually coming from a point of lack. And when we let go of that, she then went up to about 1 million a year, but the guy still provides. He loves it. It's absolutely what he wants to do. He's not earning as much money as she is, but it's his joy to be in that situation. And he likes looking after the rent and taking care and all that kind of stuff. So I do think that when we're looking at the masculine feminine, we mistake masculine and feminine for boy and girl. Like, we are all 50-50. You are as much masculine as I am, but I have a male expression of it. And when we're looking at that, women, you have the power to do an awful lot of things. And it's when we start looking at the male female argument, it's always going to be rooted in separation. As soon as I say, well, I'm a boy, therefore I've got to do X, Y, Z, and you're a girl, therefore you've got to do X, Y, Z, I'm creating separation. So I'm not allowing the full expression of who we actually are. And I think that one of the things that's happening at the moment is we used to have these very defined gender roles. If a man looks after, provides, and does his stuff, but a woman did the cooking, did the cleaning, and had this, and I think it's quite misogynistic. I don't like it, but the women had these very defined gender roles. Now, it's very cool to say, I want a man who's a provider and a leader, and that's fine. But if you turn around and say, what's the feminine bring to the table? We're not allowed to say, what's the trade? And although that sounds kind of toxic, if as a man, if you want to feel valued, what is the value that you can feel? Like, how do we, if we take the whole masculine feminine thing slightly out of it and reframe the narrative, how do we nurture that we love in the other? Like, if I'm in a relationship, I want to look after and provide for somebody if I care about them, if I respect them. On a first date, if I don't know the person, I'm not going to show up so much in my masculine. I want to know, is this person interesting? Do I like their values? Do we value each other? But if we're looking at the masculine as a society thing, how do we actually nurture it rather than how do we say, well, what pain are you in and how do you sort that out? How do we actually show that we value it? Because we look at masculine and feminine as a toxic and masculine thing, but if you look at pain shuts us down and love opens us. So if we're saying that men aren't doing the things that we think that they should be doing, that they're not looking after, they're not leading, then we're looking at an entire side of society that's shut down. So rather than saying, okay, is it masculine, is it feminine? What I think might be a nice thing to look at is, how do we open it up? How do we nurture it? And how do we support it to feel safe to open? And then it's got to provide the safety for the feminine as well. So I think men need to look at the feminine and say, how do we make the feminine feel safe? And I think women need to look at the masculine and say, how do we make the masculine look safe? But then split it slightly. I might be totally wrong on all of that. It's just a lot of stuff that's coming up at the moment.
Thank you, Ro. And Diederik, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I feel like lots of interesting points have been raised, and I hope to summarize it or kind of add more direction to it. Because we, like Richard says, we go into these masculine versus feminine or men versus women roles, where for me, the masculine is more like, well, you could say, let's remove all those labels and start looking at, there is a guiding direction of where are we going towards, like a river bank setting a course. And there is, of course, another quality, filling the river with all love and making the river worthwhile. And If that setting the course becomes too rigid, it's of course important for the river to overflow to make sure that these rigid bounds are no longer constricting what you would call the feminine, right? And the masculine would be more the guiding principle of direction setting. But without the feminine, it's empty, and the feminine without the masculine is like a lot of water, but it has no direction. It's less flat. So there's this beautiful dance in a way that both these qualities are making. And like you already said, they exist in both of us. So it's not like I need to be particular someone because I'm a man or because I'm a woman. I'm not allowed to set direction or anything. It's like these qualities are innate in us. And like you say, the challenge becomes on a society level, we've changed the roles. And now everyone is kind of trying to fit in, like where do we where do we stay? What's our way of bringing masculine and femininity into the world? And I think the example of Aragorn from Lord of the Rings is a really nice example of someone who is showing masculinity, but in a way to use his strength to help the weak and not to punish others, but to be there for other people. And that's kind of a role model in a way. And I think lots of young boys need a role model these days because it's everyone else is being looked after, and the young boys are kind of supposed to figure it out, and they find themselves lost. And even me in adolescence was kind of lost. Of I didn't want to become that man that everybody is speaking negatively about, but what do I become then? And how do I go on a date or attract women? And once in a time, got a bit of dating advice, and I looked into it and was like, this is just very abusive and all about emotional um, tricks, basically. It's like, that's not what I want to be, but what should we be then instead? And that's a really difficult thing to answer in a way without a role model.
Can I just caveat that? Sorry. There is something when we look at patriarchy. Yeah, I'm not going to go into a whole long thing here, but women, pre kind of Celtic cultures, Stone Age cultures, were all goddess worship. And we look at the patriarchy, and the patriarchy essentially is about 2,500 years ago. It's really the birth of Christianity in Rome. But before that, we had monotheistic, and then we had kind of patriarchy coming in about 10,000 years ago. Before that, women were in charge, right? Now, if you look at Jungian archetypes and that kind of thing, the most powerful archetype in humanity is the queen, which is more powerful than the god archetype and the king archetype. So there is another side of this. When we look at the idea of a man looking after providing, protecting, and everything for a woman, which again, I really do support, by the way, I think it's a natural expression. We're also looking at a woman necessarily or not necessarily being conditioned into powerlessness. I can't do it without myself. I can't look after myself. It's coming into this powerlessness. So I think if we could also look at, as humanity starts evolving, and we are all evolving, like we've all got a karmic path, but humanity, we're all going through a reincarnation. We're all reincarnating. I've been a woman as many times as I've been a man. We're all coming up. But as women start to unfold out of powerlessness, some of these things are going to fall away. So it's a question, is some of the dynamics that we're seeing now actually a letting go of old templates where women are coming into their power, but then as women come into their power, we've got the egoic stuff where we're kind of scared of it, and men are coming into their power when they're looking at value as well. I mean, is it actually a case of we heal our own pain, but actually it's humanity evolving rather than devolving? It's just a question.
Yeah, I think the evolution part is a really good question. I think, in a way, it's very strange to say that the world is getting lighter with everything that we see nowadays in the front. Energetically, I would say that we're still kind of lightening up. And if I look at the energetics of a few years ago in the same situation, it's way more dense. There's way more in the cupboard, there's way more in the background. And it's kind of, it is opening up, but it does mean it will be in the front first before we actually manage to let it go. And to add a bit more to that, there was during COVID, there was on television, there was this show with particular event would happen every day at the same every year at the same day, and they did all the fragments of the same show years prior. And at some point, I could just energetically track like, well, this is earlier, this is before, this is more modern, purely from seeing the background being less dense. So that's kind of an example of that.
We hear the term toxic masculinity thrown around a lot, so I think it's important to actually pause and ask what does that term actually mean? Because as we said, not all masculinity is toxic. In its healthy form, it can be very beautiful, protective, grounded, present, and emotionally attuned. More importantly, what does actually healthy masculinity look like? Myself, I think, to traits like accountability, emotional literacy, presence, and integrity. Also, we've got clarity, leadership, consistency, and the ability to hold emotional tension without shutting down or withdrawing. Could any of you speak to why these traits are so difficult for many men to embody?
Sure, let's go. So it's interesting, right? This term toxic masculinity is being used so much when you look on social media or anywhere on the internet. It's just thrown around like it would be two words being one. It would be like masculinity would be toxic, right? But let's be real. Like when we look, there's the divine and we live in a universe of duality, right? We have masculine and feminine, day and night, hot, cold, all those sorts of things. So when we want to be a healthy society, a healthy humanity, right? We can't judge one or the other. We can't say one of them is toxic and only the other one is good, right? Obviously, that doesn't make sense, right? Toxic masculinity, so in its the divine masculine is just as sacred and pure and valuable and powerful as the divine feminine, but it's a very different sort of power, right? So I heard also what you said right now about the how powerful the feminine is and how leaders were in the past often feminine, actually, right? How it was queens and women, goddesses leading. So why is it masculinity showing up so much toxic these days, right? There's, in my experience, there's always two different sides of the spectrum. There's a passive side of toxicity and an active side. For example, the passive side would be the guy that is withdrawing, right? That's not present, that's not emotionally available, that is not following through, not showing up. The active side, for example, could be someone that's violent and abusive. So these are just things how they can show up in everyday life, but that's not the masculinity itself that would be toxic. It's the human that has not addressed their own issues, that has not healed their own wounds, and either tries to prove, perform, and to like outperform, outdo his lack of self-worth, his lack of maturity, which causes himself and others harm, or it's just this passive part of no confidence and just not showing up at all, right? So it's interesting what you say, because these qualities you mentioned, right, around groundedness, holding space, all the like the riverbed, like Diederik explains so nicely, right? That is not taught, and then so many women don't feel safe to trust their men in relationships or even in dating because that's not developed, right? No, and that's something that doesn't just develop, in my experience, by waiting or by getting a certain age. It really comes from being taught or being modeled or coming, stepping into it by choice. We had for earlier discussion, Robert said that about safety. I believe it's really interesting and really good one, that in relationship, we want to always be both safe, right? The man and the woman, if you talk about the man-woman relationship. I've been in relationships that have been abusive from the side of the woman. And I also had so many issues that were causing drama, right? So, but I fundamentally believe, and I can say that because I went on my knees when I was in my own so-called dark night of the soul, right? And I couldn't bear these toxic dynamics in relationships anymore. And at one point, I was asking the divine to give me an answer how to end this vicious cycle of suffering. And what I've been shown was the very path to how this safety is created. So it's not toxic, but fundamentally safe. And that is exposing myself as a male, as a man, to a situation that is not safe. So being, for example, out in the nature, in the wilderness, showed me this more than ever before. Wow, this is a situation that has danger, and it is a biological instinct coming in me as a man that I can deal with this and that I can create safety and I can create fundamental providership of safety, hydration, nutrition, and shelter, etc. And that, I believe personally, is something that is deep in us, that is innate in us men. Just like a woman has a mother instinct that comes online when she births a child, when we tap into this ancient part of us that has this insight, then I found it so much more effortless to embody, not from playing tick boxing any masculine lists, but just because it's our nature, because it's who we are. And I believe we need the feminine in her full power and women in their full power as well. If we as a humanity really want to evolve to the highest level, we acknowledge that we all have both energies in us, but we also recognize there's a reason why we chose to incarnate in a male or female body. And we have to be present. We have to show up. Can't be passive anymore or toxic anymore. We have to show up.
Okay, so we got the idea, the concept of toxic masculine. One thing that you don't hear that much about is the idea of toxic feminine. And so there's you've got toxic masculine is overt and controlling, because that's how we are. Toxic feminine is covert and manipulative. Now, if you go back again, same thing, but it's very interesting. You'll see a lot about toxic masculine, but you hear very little about toxic feminine. And if you talk about toxic feminine, it's because you're in a toxic masculine. And it just makes me laugh, because if toxic feminine is covert, you're not meant to know about it. And anyone that's actually getting triggered by any toxic feminine stuff is in their toxic feminine going, no, don't, no, they're getting triggered. So when we start talking about toxicity, instead of toxic masculine and toxic feminine, I like to reframe the narrative out of the masculine feminine and go into toxic humanity. Now, if we look at toxic humanity, we're really looking at ego. And we've got our awakening scale, power versus force. Anyone that's not fully awake yet, which is pretty much everybody, on our awakening scale. But then we've got the awake people, and there's very few of them, but then everything. So most people on the planet are holding 70-80% of confusion and ego related to what is and what isn't, and who they are and who they're not. So if we're looking at the whole idea, and I've got to try and remember the question around toxic masculinity thrown away, and what does it look like to be emotionally healthy? Again, we're looking at leadership, we're looking at consistency, but what again we're really looking at is what is the expression of love that I can give, and what is the expression of love that's required of me? And the second you put in the templates, we've got the idea that we have this masculine template, but we don't have a feminine template, and that's fine, okay, because it's allowing evolution. But if we're going into toxic masculinity, but we're not talking about toxic femininity, that's a problem. But also, if we are looking at toxic humanity, we're looking at separation and pain. And then the question doesn't become, what does it look like when it's not there? The question becomes, what's the natural expression of divinity that I am? And if I have a partner, or if I have a group of people, how can I love them in a way that nurtures and supports them? How can we, as feminine, support that? And I think, Maximilian, I think you're completely right, by the way. We do have as much masculine and feminine as each other, but we do then have a genetic expression. And going back into the genetic expression, if we look at testosterone, we look at prostate cancer. I'm not going to make this really long, right? Masculine men, Stone Age, running around, hunting mammoths, everything is based on our ability to provide. And we have to be quiet and very, very focused. And so men, when you're looking at territory, the more testosterone we have, the more we're looking at territory. We're looking at physical territory, which is why we can be quiet. We get on with each other, even if we hate each other, because we have to work as a unit. And then we kind of sit there and go, right, women, social territory. So you can get women that are besties, put them all in a house, and at the end of a couple of months, they're going to hate each other because you have a social side of things. So understanding that your partner is not the same as you, your partner is not perfect, and your partner doesn't have, the ability to do things the way, men, we are different. But for me to hold a safe space for a woman, it's not a physically safe space. I mean, yeah, sure, but I live in London. As long as we're not in a danger zone and there's gunshots, what my partner needs is emotional safety, which means me working on my feminine. And yeah, do you know what? My validation, my confidence, that's going to be based on my masculine. And what I need my partner to do is just freaking accept me if I'm not doing so well. If we're not going on holiday to Bora Bora and I'm trying really hard and I'm really, really stressed out, I need her to kind of come I'm feeling insecure in the physical world, just sit there and support me on that. So again, the question is, what does it look like? We don't know, because everyone's different. My version of masculinity, when it's completely healed, will be completely different from Diederik's and completely different from Maximilian's. But we have very quickly, the other side of it is the law of attraction. What can you attract? So if you're getting into a relationship, you're going to find a relationship that is exactly equal to your healed masculine as a woman. That's what you attract in. Then polarity keeps you in the relationship. As a man, I can go and I can be high value, I can do anything I want, but I will never have a woman that is higher than my healed feminine. I won't attract her in because of the law of attraction. So while we can look at what should a man do, what's toxic, what's this, what's that, that doesn't help me. Even if we have a gold standard for what that is, that doesn't necessarily help me in my own relationship unless I do my own healing.
Yeah, I would like to add to that what you said about toxicity. That I think no matter what the reasons are, whether it's a bad childhood or difficult past partners, it will never ever give you the excuse of hurting another being, right? Or have someone else give excuses for someone like, oh, they've been through a lot, so you should understand why they're doing it this way, or no. It's of course helping you see someone else seeing what they've been through, but ultimately it comes down to a choice of, okay, I've been hurt, but am I going to repeat that, or am I going to do the work to make sure I don't hurt another human being? And I think in that pressure cooker, something will emerge where you start looking for ways to be a healthy masculine or a healthy feminine.
Mm.
And secondly, I think it's very easy to see what the other side is doing, and as men are really good at pointing at others. And in a way, in every therapy relationship, there is this understanding of what am I bringing to this dynamic, and what is it inside of me that is not healed, that is still causing this dynamic to come forth, right? Or what is it why I am still avoidant, or what is it why I'm still shutting down instead of being present for her? And I think that's an ongoing journey and at some point you will find a partner that's leveling with that. And even there, you kind of still bring in your luggage with you. And at some point, after the whole honeymoon phase of the relationship, you find that you both are unpacking each other's baggage, and you have to keep having this commitment of doing the best I can to make sure I am a nice human being to someone else, and vice versa. I think that's kind of the, yeah, setting the direction for a healthy path forward.
I've noticed a quiet pattern across the emotional lives of many men, and that is a deep fear of vulnerability and truly being seen, of letting someone close. And often it's not even conscious, and it shows up as avoidance, distance, withdrawal. But I think it's important to name how avoidance can look, as again, it's not always obvious. So it might show up as overworking, emotional detachment, hyper independence, or even being overly logical in moment that calls for emotional presence. So why is it that so many men, even those who deeply crave connection, find themselves pulling away when it starts to feel real? And what have men emotionally inherited from their fathers and mothers that makes intimacy feel unsafe? What does the issue of avoidance or avoidant attachment feel like from the inside? And how can men begin to recognize these patterns in themselves, not from shame, but with curiosity and compassion? And how do we begin to heal the emotional inheritance that taught them to fear closeness in the first place?
So if I look at my own past and my own experience of what is it why I started shutting down, there is a lot of, in a way, you could say it's an innate pattern that was already there. Instead of blaming the father or the mother, like you've already been born with certain tendencies. At the same time, I think for many people who shut down, there have been a fear of intimacy because intimate moments felt unsafe. And it could mean constant being punished. It could mean being criticized all the time, having someone who's overbearing, over controlling, and anything that's basically would make normally would make a happy household instead made it a place where you're already kind of in a stressful zone. And for people who've been through that kind of experience, it's often in partners or later in life that meeting someone up close kind of brings back that whole baggage. And that's kind of where I started shutting down when women started approaching me at the Saturday night, club night, or anything. And it took me a lot of effort, kind of undoing that damage that's there from such difficult, experience I've been to.
Such a good question. I feel this is something for all of us humans, right? For all of us, men and women. This really like fear of intimacy, because what I also feel what happens in intimacy when we get really close to someone, especially in a man-woman relationship, it's like the cleanest mirror right in front of our face that shows us all in us that is, that is unhealed, that is insecure, and all of that. So if someone gets really intimate with their partner, right, how can this show up? It can show up like the man, for example, checking out, right? Awareness wise, not being in his body, because it becomes uncomfortable to feel the insecurity and the suppressed emotions. That's a really key part, to feel the suppressed emotions being triggered by fully being seen, by getting so close to someone, and becoming aware of what has been associated from, denied, and, just hidden and suppressed. So I feel this is one of the reasons why people shut down, because there is those things, and it can show up as not going deep, like you said, in a relationship. What I see a lot with clients is commitment issues, that to actually commit to a exclusive, intimate relationship, or to go deep, or even had people recently. I worked with someone from the US that had 10 years no intimacy with someone after he was already an adult and having relationships, just from what you also mentioned, what happened in past relationships, right? So often we talk about childhood trauma, but there's also trauma that happens in very toxic relationships, right? So then there's a fear of intimacy, a fear of actually fully being seen, a fear of feeling. So the biggest part here from us all humans is just the fear of fully being alive and dealing with and feeling the aliveness, the full spectrum of emotions, because there's some suppressed ones from traumatic emotional experiences that would be triggered when that sort of emotion would be seen or felt, right? So there's a fear of letting that come up. And the very fear and judgment of it is exactly the mechanism that keeps them suppressed. Intimacy would be the most powerful, and this, in my experience, the most vulnerable opportunity to bring this out, but an absolute powerful healing container if it's safe to have this healing with each other in a relationship, right? So, yeah.
When we're born, we are nothing but love. We don't even know that we're different from our mother. We don't know that we're separate. And the first time you're sitting there and you're cold, you think, I am cold. You think, I'm hungry, I am hungry. So we get this I, which our ego is then based on. Okay? But there's 5 core wounds that the entire identity is based on. But one of them is trust. Now, the trust one is where I love my mum, and I turn around and I give her a little macaroni necklace and she laughs at me and then throws it out or whatever. So I get these little core wounds. They come in around the age of 5, 6 years old. And at that point, I start learning that I can't trust love. Now, as a child, my survival depends on my mum and my dad keeping me alive. So in order to handle the attachment, I create this block on the heart, and I create a heart wound, a survival style, which is the lack of trust attachment survival style. And at that point, I realized that my emotions, I go deep into my emotions make me vulnerable, and my emotions, I quote, love with pain. Now, as Maximilian said, this can happen later on in life, but if you now equate love with pain, anytime your emotions get stronger, your fear gets stronger, and it comes to this cutoff point. So when we talk about avoidant survival style, we're actually looking at codependent survival style, but it's actually avoidant because we've got this fear of getting hurt and fear of actually feeling like we're going to be destroyed. And so we can handle shallow connection. Now, to cope with that, we want a lot of connection. So a lot of people with avoidant will have hundreds of friends. They'll be very social, they'll take drugs, they'll do all the sorts of things that they want to do because it maintains an excuse. I can't stay too long here because I've got all this other stuff going on. Now, we've also got people traveling a lot. A lot of people go into spirituality, people go into all sorts of different things where they connect through the role that they've got. So people don't see them, they see the role. I might be a soldier, I might be a spiritual healer, whatever it is. So in order to actually help with that, as Maximilian was just saying, is the container. What you're looking at is somebody who is terrified of getting their heart ripped out. Now, personally, I think there's almost as many women that get this as men that get this. We're talking about why are men so avoidant. But if we now look historically, we go back to the whole masculine thing. You know, a man, I was watching a thing yesterday, an average good looking man, an average like a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10, average man on a dating app has to swipe 250 times to get one match. Out of 4 matches, he'll get 1 lunch. And out of 4 lunches, 1 will show up. So the level of rejection that we have to deal with, that we're expected to deal with, we've got to plan a date, buy the date, do all this kind of stuff. Then if we want to be intimate with our partner, we come home, we want to be intimate, and she's like, no, I can't be bothered, then she'll reject us. And she doesn't expect us to be hurt for the next week. Now, if you're a guy, your female partner comes in and says, I'm feeling sexy tonight, let's get jiggy. And you turn around and go, oh, I'm a bit bored and I've got a headache. She will not speak to you for a week, right? But so when we look at, if we're talking about men being, and then we look at, well, why don't we talk about our emotions? How can men have sex without being emotionally connected in? If a woman has multiple sexual partners, doesn't have a huge amount of emotional connection during all of that, and is really in her masculine, we say she's holding trauma. We say she's traumatized because she's doing that. She's not having emotional connection. But if a man does it, he's just a man. So the side of this is, if you look at the amount of rejection that men have to hold on to and men have to be able to cope with, and then ask, why are they feeling a little bit, why do they seem emotionally checked out? Anybody that has avoidance needs safety. That is it. Simple as that. And that safety doesn't come from running after them. If I've got a partner that's avoidant, if she needs space, I cannot turn around and go, oh, by the way, I'm over here. What's going on? And ask her to talk. Just let her go. Tell her that I'm here and I'm ready when you come back, and just be in space. But to do that, it's very difficult, because if we're scared of rejection ourselves, as soon as our partner leaves, we're like, bugger, they're going to go away. So we have to heal our own heart, but it's just holding that safety for everybody.
And how does shame shape the way that men relate to their emotions, their identity, and their relationships? Because often men carry a deep unspoken shame that doesn't always come from something they have done, but from who they were told they had to be. Shame around being too sensitive, around needing help, around not performing, not providing, not being enough. And also, men are conditioned to associate sex with performance, conquest, and control. So there is pressure to perform, pressure to last, to initiate, and to prove something through sexual encounters. When sex don't go as expected, or when it's disconnected from emotional intimacy, when a man has sex with a woman that he doesn't truly respect or feel emotionally safe with, there is often a wave of shame that follows. So, how can men begin to reclaim their sexuality not as a performance, but as a space for presence, connection, and healing?
That's such a powerful question, because I feel sexuality is like, it's a huge part of life, right? So many people put it down like it's not that important. If the rest of the relationship is good, it's okay. But what I've seen with most of my clients, like no matter how long they were in relationship, it's gonna fall apart at some point if emotional intimacy and sexual intimacy is not there, right? It's such a key theme. It's literally what bonds a man and a woman together. So if a woman doesn't find emotional and sexual satisfaction and having her needs met in the relationship, it will not last. And then we come back to this. You remember earlier I talked about the mama's boy syndrome, right? And sex and intimacy is the most extreme and vulnerable experience of that, where all that is revealed. So here you go with the performance mindset, performance anxiety coming up for men, and trying to perform again to get validation, to soothe and build the insecure ego, instead of remembering what sex actually is. It's sacred union of the masculine and feminine, of a man and woman, right? A sacred energy exchange. It's a sacred union. And it can be so much fun, so much bliss, and absolutely amazing, right? And healing even. But then we go with modern society, what happens around sex. Like I grew up 10 years old, I started watching porn. And if you look at statistics, I recently did a updated research, and I found adult males across the board around the world have around 95 to 99% of men watch porn regularly. So what that does, it subconsciously perverts and distorts this even more, right? So when we have this conditioning around pornography, there's a lot of things that happen on a dopamine level, and objectifying women, bringing the whole sexual experience to a more superficial and disconnected level. But the most harmful thing that I've found that happens is that there's a disconnect happening between sexual desire and emotional awareness, between sexuality and heart and love. There's a disconnect, because what you see in pornography, which is so much even more than we tend to think, and it's even more harmful than we tend to think. So there's a disconnect between sex and love. But sex is part of life. That's the very reason all of us are alive, right? But if it's disconnected, then sex is not anymore this place of deep intimacy, love, and healing, but it's more a place where men try to perform, to prove themselves. And it can be very toxic for the men and women to approach it from that place, because like if you look at the statistics, we are very far off from what's healthy. The average man lasts around, I think it was 4 minutes during sex. And the woman needs at least 20 minutes during penetration to open up to a deeper sort of climax and orgasm, right? So there's a big disconnect, lots of sexual dysfunction. And I feel bringing this into healing is, I loved what Diederik said about, when we're aware of these things, we gotta at some point have take the responsibility and look at things and actually bring healing into them. Work with a healer, bring healing into it, just have the uncomfortable moment of acknowledging something is not going as we want to. We feel insecure, we try to perform, all of these types of things, to look at it and to take responsibility for it and find a safe place. That's why I found it's also for us men so important, just having a safe, judgment-free space where we can talk about all of this with each other, whether it's sex or anything else, a safe space outside of the relationship with our woman where we can be vulnerable, or we can share what's happening in our sex life and in all areas of life, because there's too much shame. It's amazing that you brought up the word shame, right, in this context, because there's nothing to be ashamed of around sexuality. It's just this perversion and distortion that brings in this thing around shame. Because when do we feel shame? When we think or believe that we are wrong or broken, or sex would be wrong or broken. Then comes shame, which again on the Hawkins scale is the lowest vibration that we don't want to feel, right? So bringing healing into that, reclaiming our sacred sexuality, mastering this energy, not being controlled by it anymore, learning to master it and to be safe without shutting it down, without dissociating from it, but really connecting with it, mastering it. And I believe sex is too beautiful to not master it and to not have this expression in our life.
I don't think that men are conditioned to just validate through sex. We do validate through sex, but you look at a small child, you get a boy, and from the age of about 10, he's not allowed physical contact. The only time he gets to touch his male friends is through violence. Play fighting, sport, it's always aggressive. We don't actually get that connection. We're told that if we want to hug and kiss our mum, that we're sissies, that we're mummy's boys. And so suddenly you've got two children, one boy, one girl, that both have as much need for physical intimacy as each other. And suddenly one of them's told he can't have it. The only time then he gets acceptance, bearing in mind, we don't deserve love. It's our efforts that deserve love. We only deserve love if we have resources, money, we look after, provide. It's not us, it's what we do. So the only time we finally get accepted is when we get sex. So it's the validation and the intimacy that we're looking for during the sex. So I think, again, if we look at addressing that, porn I find interesting because, yes, men like porn, but porn is the only time they get sexual expression where they don't have pressure. So you're sitting there, you're working, you come home, and then you've got to look after the lead, provide and protect. And then in the bedroom, you've then got to make a calm, you've got to have and everything. And so it's quite rare. And you find that men that have more pressure in the bedroom want porn more because it's when they get a sexual release, but they don't have any pressure on them. Women actually love porn too, but women's porn is literature based. So we look at what porn does to men, but women, 90% of female porn is literature, and it's based on being craved. 50 Shades of Grey style thing. It's actually domination fantasies, rape fantasies, and attack fantasies. Now, we never want that to actually happen in real life, but we're looking at a different kind of validation. I want a man to crave me so much he can't keep his hands off me. So we look at that template too. When a woman goes into the bedroom and goes, right, crave me. Where am I giving in this? Where am I bringing in? Where am I making him feel safe? Where's he making me feel safe? Why don't we role play? Why don't we tap? Why don't we talk to each other? So I think sex is the most important thing. And I think that the best way to do it is find somebody that you admire and practice as much as you can.
Last thing I want to say about this, what made me kill this performance anxiety, was the realization that the masculine embodiment, or being a man in sex, is not about performance. It's actually about presence, right?
Yeah.
It's about presence.
Absolutely.
Period. And if you are present in your body and you are holding the space and you're building emotional connection and safety for the woman, the bodies know what to do. Erection is happening. You're lasting way longer. And the woman will feel safe to open up, surrender, and have her satisfaction way deeper. So, and it's just more attractive also to be present rather than to try to perform.
Yeah, some avoidant men, they tend to like space out, like it's like they're there, but they're not really there. Thank you, guys. Before we close today's episode, I would like to ask each one of you one final question, but also to let our listeners know how they can find you, connect with your work, or go deeper with you. Richard, what does it mean to be a man beyond the societal scripts, and where can our listeners find you or work with you?
It means to be kind, it means to be caring, and it means to be passionate, both about what you're doing in life and the person that you're sharing it with, and to do everything you can to be an expression of love within the relationship and within the world around you. To find me, easiest way to find me would be to go on Instagram, Roo, ROO_success magic, and just message me through there. That way we don't have to worry about websites which are being remade.
Diederik, what does it mean to be a man beyond the societal scripts? And where can our listeners find you or work with you?
For me, being a man means presence. It means taking care. It means also having a listening ear, but also being able to communicate your own needs. And having worked through a lot of the stuff that was there basically in the luggage. Well, to find me, you can go on to healinginpractice.com, where I describe how to work throughout all kinds of patterns and issues that may require healing.
Thank you. And Maximilian, what does it mean to be a man beyond the societal scripts? And where can our listeners find you and work with you?
So what I want to tell a man is, you are safe, grounded presence, and you are enough, right? And you are needed right now to show up in that actually in your life. And you have the full capacity to do that if you choose to step into it. And you can find me just at lovelikeaking.com. And there's my YouTube channel, my podcast, my Instagram link there. And also I have a free masterclass coming out, just lovelikeaking.com/masterclass, where I share a lot of these techniques that we talked about today.
As we come to the end of this conversation, I want to thank each of our guests for their honesty, their wisdom, their presence, and their guidance. And to every man listening, I want to say, the emotional patterns you carry are not flaws. They are echoes of what you have lived through and can become doorways to something deeper, to healing, to connection, to healthy family dynamics, and to grace. So I'd like to leave you with a simple reflection. Take a moment, close your eyes, soften your breaths, and ask yourself, what emotion have I been avoiding the most? What would it feel to be fully seen and still loved? Let the answers come gently. Just let them open up something. No need to fix anything. Just notice. Because awareness is the first act of healing. Thank you for listening with an open heart. If you want to connect with me, you'll find me on Instagram at MagicalMara _. Thank you for seeking grace with us today. Remember, you are love and compassion. Be well, be cool, and be love.